Well, there's an interesting shift that is happening in wealth. And it's not just actually wealth when I think about it. It's right across the board. And where this comes from, I attended a seminar recently, and the speaker told me something incredibly interesting. And when you really think about it, it really holds true. They asked the audience a question: who do you think controls the decision-making of most of the personal wealth in North America right now? I'm like, yeah, that's a good question. And her answer was, it's women between the ages of 45 and 55. I was like, that's interesting. Why? So because they are making the decisions for their children, they're making their decisions for their parents, and they're making decisions for their own household. I was like, yeah, you know what? That rings pretty true. I know how the decisions are made in my household. I just, as I said, just go around and, whatever they tell me to do, that's what I do. And it's this big shift that we're seeing, right? Within a generation or two, we've seen a major shift on who makes the decisions in households, especially around things like wealth management. And it's not just wealth management, by the way. This is a sort of a universal decision-making process that has changed. And what used to be, and I'm going to call them underserved segments of the community, are now becoming the major decision makers. And, the younger generation are more equipped now, secondary generations within family units. And so I thought of the question, how do you engage in these growing demographics? How do you engage in what would be traditionally underserved, although that is changing? And how do you make it sort of this huge market? So at our conference, I had the good fortune of listening to Marissa Teeter. She spoke at our summit, and, I found her knowledge very valuable, and I thought this would be a great podcast and a great discussion that we can have. So before we start, who's Marissa? So the last 20 years, Marissa, she's been a business advisor, an executive coach. She does keynote speaker, which is where I met her. She was also in the wealth management business, so she knows it quite well. She's, coaches leaders who run multi-million businesses, multi-billion dollars, and as I understand it, even involved in a few startups here and there. So quite knowledgeable in all of this. She also has her own podcast, which is Teeter's Talk, and it's quite good. I would recommend everybody listen to it. And it's telling stories on the journey of remarkable leaders in all walks of life. It's not just really in our industry. And how to engage and empower that leader in all of us. So, Marissa, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. It's nice to be on this side of the microphone every once in a while.
So why don't we start at the basics, Marissa? How did you get here? Tell us your story. Everyone wants to know your story.
It's so funny because I definitely never imagined myself to be in wealth or anything related to investments and finance. If I'm being completely honest, I was be a doctor, and then I figured out how many years that would take me before I started to make money, and I thought that's going to take way too long. I just knew I wanted to help people, and my journey here was not certainly one that I planned. I ended up getting into consulting pretty soon out of university, and ended up consulting for a private wealth firm. Really wanted to reposition themselves, rebrand, really become more investor-centric, and did a lot of work with them and ended up running their entire wealth division a few years later when they hired me full-time. And I spent many years there working in the private exempt space, which was really an interesting thing, especially for people who have never been there. I know for a long time, my own father was like, are you sure it's not a Ponzi scheme? Are you sure?
You sure?
Are you sure? This
boiler room,
very different. I loved it though, because it was so different. And we were working with pretty much exclusively high net worth clients, which, they're their own breed. And it was fun. It was great. It was great to be able to build something and be part of something. And then I got an opportunity to go work with one of Canada's largest wealth firms at IG, and I spent 6 or 7 years there as an executive through a significant rebrand and repositioning that they were doing, which was just a massive undertaking. And really that's what drew me there in the first place. I mean, I really have an entrepreneurial spirit. I love building things. I've been a part of a lot of different startup journeys. I really can relate to advisors who are entrepreneurial in their approach. So although I've kind of been in the executive positions, I have a lot in common with these entrepreneurial individuals. Right. And I feel that was a really big part of, me going out on my own and kind of figuring out how can I better serve people who are high performing or business owners. I love working with advisors in this space. It's some of my favorite work. So yeah. And I thought, I'm just going to start a podcast because selfishly, I also enjoy having conversations with fun people. So that's my own thing, but
I love it.
yeah.
I love it. And again, at our conference, I thought your talk was fantastic and the whole panel was great. So let's go to, what I was thinking about. As I said in my introduction, there's this whole, study around the traditionally underengaged segments, such as now women are again, according to this study, 45 and 55, make the majority of decisions around household wealth in North America. Is that your experience? Like, are you seeing that? You've been in the wealth business for quite a while. You consult with a lot of advisors. Is that shift a reality, first of all? And how did that occur?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, we're seeing a resounding shift in terms of how advisors have to position themselves and the work they do to cater to all stakeholders in a family unit.
Right.
And, I like to set the ground rules around this to say there are family units out there where, sure, the man is still the primary decision maker. He has been left to manage the finances, and certainly you should be catering to him accordingly. But I think where we're going as an industry is looking at where we are underserving, where are the markets where we can do better, where traditionally we haven't been able to really meet the needs of these growing groups. And when I say growing, I mean in size and power and authority.
Right.
And women are up there. And there are others, new immigrants to the country, business owners, entrepreneurs. There are growing groups that are very influential on how advisors should be thinking about how they're running their practices. But women are kind of all encompassing. And traditionally, and, we're going to speak in some generalities today around, where the majority, but not all of the situations are. But, women have typically been the secondary, not the primary client in a lot of household relationships. And sometimes by choice, by the clients, and sometimes just by the way the industry has been built. This industry has not been built on the backs of serving a diverse client segment, right? It was very much built to serve men as the decision makers, for advisors to be there to focus on returns and investments. But that's the way it was structured. So I tell people as we're having these conversations, we don't have to apologize for how we got here, where we're at. It is what it is. We were serving the market as it existed for the past 50 years, but it's shifting. And so this is really about making sure that your practice is shifting accordingly. And one of the lowest hanging fruit is that segment of women who are now controlling much of the buying power. They're also controlling much of the wealth. In Canada specifically, next year, they will likely control over half the wealth in this country, and that will continue to grow. And yes, it's through inheritance. It's also through increased income, divorce, business ownership, business transitions. And so generally, if you want to follow the power in the decision-making, you follow the money. And that's ultimately where it's going to be. So if you're an advisor who's not equipped to serve a high return, high opportunity market, you might want to think twice about that. And every company out there is doing that. So when you look at the big brands, be it in households or clothing or travel or experience, everyone is shifting to understand how they can better cater to, yes, women specifically, but to other underserved markets.
Yeah. No, and that's sort of the point is demographics change, right? Decision-making changes. It's not never stagnant, nor is business. It's always, as I say in my book, it's a circle, right? It evolves and it evolves and it evolves. And this is a major shift that you're seeing. And it's not something that's, I'm going to say it's gradual. It's really happening in a very big way. And when I talk to advisors and I ask them if they're adaptive, and again, it's not necessarily just to your point, the woman market. It's also their kids are now having more and more say because they're more tech savvy. They can do more research. And all of a sudden they're going to their parents and they're like, did you know you can get a lower fee? Did you know this? Did you know that? Do you know the other thing? And if you're not equipped to deal with that family unit, that could be challenging for your business going forward. So as advisors, better engage and better serve these under engaged segments, what should they be doing? Like, if you had to give them a few pieces of advice, what would those pieces of advice be to change some of their practices from traditional to servicing these again, underserved markets?
I think a lot of advisors probably need to shift away from doing all the talking to doing most of the listening. And I know that seems like a pretty aggressive statement, but
I was going to say, and a hard one.
I know it's a tough pill for all of us to swallow, as two people who probably enjoy the sound of their own voices have their own podcast. But
Yeah.
I think it's traditionally the advisor role has really, I need to have the advice. There's, I need to be very confident in what I'm delivering. I need to have the solutions. I need to have the answers. And a lot of advisors will come out strong with solutions, answers, ideas, investments. I think the industry is shifting a little bit, and what people really need are people who can listen.
Right.
And, when you want to engage these underserved markets, or if you want to, it's really about engaging all the stakeholders in the family unit. So if you have a client, the question you should be asking yourself is, do I have all the key people at the table? Am I speaking with, am I engaging with, am I connecting with all the key people? And there are very simple questions you can ask your client is really, are all the key people who are part of your financial well-being and future, are they involved in these conversations? Who else should we be engaging in these conversations? Who else should be at the table when we're having these important talks about your financial future, about your family legacy? So I think a lot of it is about asking your client who the key stakeholders are in their financial well-being and making sure that you're engaging them in the conversation. And there's stats to support this, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but if you are not engaging the next generation, your clients, children, their, whoever is set to inherit or be part of their decision-making for their financial well-being and their financial future, there is a very high turnover rate upon any type of life event. And people always think it's death, and it's not just death. It's, illness happens. And I always say people are always afraid of shifts in the market because that'll affect their clients, or death. And I said, no, you're really forgetting the big one. It's the eldest daughter.
Right.
When the eldest daughter comes in and starts to just amalgamate everything to make her life easier, because to your point, she's taking care of the kids. And, I'm sure sometimes it's the eldest son, of course, and we're generalizing. I'm the eldest daughter, so I'll use myself as an example. All I can think about right now is how can I do things to make my life easier, to help support my parents and my children. So it's like, okay, you're going to come work with my advisor. I'm transferring you to my bank. I'm going to be involved. Like, let's get everything figured out. So people really worry about sometimes the wrong things. And it's about making sure you have all the stakeholders. And again, this is where we go back to women. So if you have a lot of client relationships, are both partners, are all key stakeholders in the room when you're having conversations? Are all co-business owners in the room?
Right.
Or perhaps you have the business owner, but do you have their bench strength in the room when you're having conversations? Do you have their accountant, their bookkeeper, their lawyer, their business? Do you have all the people? And as a financial advisor, you cannot be the quarterback. You cannot be the connective tissue if you're not speaking to everybody. And that's the biggest piece.
Well, I think it comes down to, and I get a few observations from what you were saying. It comes down to what I've always felt is the most important part of not only this business, all business, is relationship building. And you build relationships by listening, not telling. And, the wealth management industry has come from almost a sales bent organization where it was features. It was, I'll get you the best MER cost. I'll get you the best investment, best return. We've all found that all falls flat now, right? Because it's basically commoditized. Like, I don't know who can go to anyone and look them in the eye and say, I'm going to get you a better return over a long period of time. But I do know people who have created great, long-lasting relationships by truly not only listening to their clients, but to your point, to be part of that family unit, to listen to everybody who counts and connect with each one of those people. So relationship building is so important, and so much more important than what product you sell anymore. So that was one observation from what you said. And the other observation was, and I read a stat, is how, to your point, what are the events that cause people to change advisors? And to your point, death is certainly one of them. But one of them also is divorce. It's something like 80-something% of people who get divorced change financial advisors at that moment. retirement itself is a catalyst. You got more time on your hands. You're like, what has this person really been doing for me all these years? I don't think he's been doing much. Maybe this is the time. I got time on my hands. I should go see what's in the marketplace. So, but if you have that relationship, those are harder to break than, that traditional transactional type mindset I think we've had as an industry.
I think too, and you said it, but again, this industry was built on a very sales driven, selling funds, picking stocks, creating returns. And that was a differentiator. People could kind of differentiate on, well, my secret sauce is this, and I can pick this way and I can outperform. It is getting tougher and tougher to do that. And the analogy that I use is clients really are focused on outcomes and impact. And how you get them there. Well, first of all, there's more ways to get them there than just investments. And we all know that now. Integrative planning requires risk management. We've got insurance. We've got, all these other pieces that make up a full kind of financial wellness picture for your clients. So it goes far beyond the product, and it's about the impact and the outcomes. And the analogy that I use, and it's not perfect, but, when we go to build a house, we basically will pick the layouts that we want or the finishes, or maybe you're just doing a renovation. You're not going to the ceramic place and like, tell me how these ceramics were made.
Exactly.
Right? Like, tell me every detail of what went into these. Ultimately, I'm just looking for the finished look, the finished outcome. And that's where people are looking to now, is to say, listen, you're going to lose me if you get into the details of my investments and my portfolio. I want to know that you can deliver the outcomes and the impact that I'm looking for that align with my values is a really big thing. And it sounds very woo-woo, but it's like, what's important to me? Yeah. And when you go back to the listening piece, I can't tell you how many times I've sat down with people who will make comments to me, well, we'd love to do this, but our advisor says that we should save. Or I'm like, what are you talking about? If you want to travel and take 2 cruises every year, then tell your advisor that and tell them to figure out how to make that happen.
Right,
like something's missing here, right? So So anyways, I just think it's what was really the selling feature in the past. And I think sadly what a lot of people got really good at and built their businesses on is evolving. And I get that the transition's hard, that now you need to be really good at building relationships and asking questions and having tough conversations to really survive in this industry.
Well, and thrive. Like you're seeing, well, I'll speculate that 1/3 of the advisors have left the industry since the pandemic. And the reason is because of survivability, because they can't keep up with technology. Like, even using Zoom to communicate with their clients seems to be tough on them. So they just, A, gave up, and B, it's not the same game where it was all about, I can get better returns or lower price or this or that. It reminds me of a story, and I tell the story all the time. I've told the story in the book. I've told it on this podcast, but it illustrates what clients think are important. And I use my mom. So my mom, she was down here and she was saying, and she's going on and on about her advisor. She loves her advisor. Oh, Jason this, Jason that, Jason the other thing. I'm like, Mom, you really like your advisor? And of course, I'm a YPC advisor. But I'm like, of course. But I'm like, what is it that you do like about Jason? Why do you like him so much? She's like, Chris, every quarter he calls me just to ask how I'm doing. Aww. I'm like, that's really nice. I'm like, that's great. I'm like, Mom, do you know what rate of return you got last year on your investments? She's like, nope. I'm like, do you know what you pay Jason every year to look after your investments? Nope. I'm like, could you name 3 holdings in your portfolio right now? Nope. But I love Jason. And it goes to the point is he's getting the result she wants, which is somebody that knows her, that knows what she wants, she can trust, and knows that they're looking after the thing. That might be an extreme example, but it's not that extreme.
No, probably not. I think a lot of people just want to have someone who they feel has their back and is going to help them get to where they want to go. And, the biggest part of that is just really, we talk about know your client, all the time in this industry. And I really laugh sometimes because I think, do you really know your client? And maybe we should be updating this form because, knowing their risk tolerance or their time horizons or how much money they're worth is not necessarily a full picture of what matters to them and how they want to spend that money or what's important to them as it relates to that money. So
Right.
yeah, it's a funny concept where I always tell people, know your client, but actually really know your client.
Well, I could not agree more. Like, I remember laughing because they had, tightened up the rules on how often you had to update KYC information on the system. And by the way, it was every 2 years. And people were outraged. They're like, how am I ever going to do that and keep up with it? I'm like, wait a minute. You're not talking to your clients, not even once over a 2-year period to better understand the changes that have occurred in their situation, on how you can consult them, on how you can help and make their life better. 2 years? I'm like, I would be surprised if you shouldn't be updating it every 6 months, but every 2 years, and it still seemed outrageous to people.
Yeah. And that was a common reaction for a lot of advisors, for what it's worth, not just in your circle, also in my circle. But I think it just shows how low the bar is for advisors who really want to take things to the next level and really engage with their clients. I think as a society, a lot of investors and clients have kind of have very low expectations of what their advisor does for them, in terms of they're there if I need them. Okay, but I don't know what I need from them. I don't know what they could possibly do. I don't see the value. Like, they manage my money, but that's about it. And I think there's just a huge opportunity to, yes, we're talking about underserved markets, but I would say, are all your clients underserved potentially? Is there room for you to really lean in and ask more? They're called life-centered questions about
Right.
where they're at in their life, what's going on, what events have occurred, what events are maybe approaching that they're concerned about that could have a financial impact. Like, are you just having conversations? So I tell advisors, it's a huge opportunity. It's low-hanging fruit out there. If you can show a client that you do more than just manage their money, that's a huge opportunity to create really strong client relationships.
Absolutely. Like, if your review process, and this also talk to advisors, I'm like, if your review process is your client sits down and you put the statement in front of them and start talking about their investments, you're way off the mark, right? That is not what financial advisors do. I'm not saying that is not incorporated when you speak to a client.
Sure.
But that's not the first thing you talk to a client about. You should be talking about how their life is and what's changing and what planning they need and are there any problems. You shouldn't just put the statement in front of them and say, let me tell you how we're doing right now.
Tell you how.
I think we're missing, and I think we're missing the mark here a little bit.
Yeah. And again, those statements, as you and I know, with the disclosure requirements and how every company builds their statements differently. And there's a lot of wizardry that you can build into statements. And, the advisors are going to find the angle that best suits them. And again, there's no value in it for the client, because at the end of the day, when you're showing the statement, you're showing what occurred in the past. And a lot of people are very forward looking and want to know, how are you going to take care of me tomorrow? How are you going to make sure my family's protected in the future? So, if you want to pat yourself on the back to show your client what a great job you did, or come up with whatever excuse it is to show why you didn't do a great job, that's great too. But again, we're talking about evolving all of this to maybe rethink how we do a couple things to better serve.
Well, and again, and statement is point in time. Unless they're willing to cash out all their investments at that particular day, it's a pretty meaningless conversation, other than to your point, let's review what I did do, not what I'm going to do. But I think that our industry, though, is evolving. What else is evolving, and maybe you can comment on this, is, everybody wants to deal in the high net worth space. Right? That's, this sort of shiny object that every advisor talks about, is this high net worth space. What we've been talking about is even more critical to people who have more money. And I know that you've had a lot of experience in this. So maybe you can talk about how much more important it is to people who have a lot of money to engage family units, to make sure you know who the decision maker is, all of those types of things. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. People struggle sometimes with this, especially advisors who've been doing this a long time. Like, why do I have to go high net worth? What is the value? And, and then people wonder why why they got shuffled over to, a digital advisor because they have less than a certain amount of assets. And I think where we can all agree, and this is a generality, it's not a one size fits all, is that generally with more finances, more wealth comes more complexity. And the idea is that you need someone who has the skill set to be able to manage complexity. And that is where advisors really get to shine when you're dealing with high net worth clients, is to show them how you can create additional value to manage their complexities, be it around their family complexities, their financial complexities, their business complexities. How do you be the quarterback of their life, not just of their finances, because their finances is a part of it, but how do you provide incremental value to start talking about tax planning, estate planning, legacy planning? Are they business owners? Are you talking about business transitions, succession strategies? It's really, family foundation, trusts, family corps, things of that nature. How much value can you provide in creating complexity? The interesting thing that I learned, about solving complexity, don't create complexity.
Sure.
Solve for the complexity.
Hopefully we can solve for it. We can create some too, but hopefully we solve some too.
Solve for it. Although it is funny because I know there's a lot of advisors out there that I think still play in that space where if they speak in really big terms and make everything sound really complex, it'll almost scare their clients into continuously staying for them because it's so scary and it's so complex. So yes, don't be complex with your clients. Solve their complexity.
Right. Solve the complexity.
The interesting thing about high net worth advisors is you have to understand how they created this wealth. And a lot of times, they built it. They earned it. And so they're either very busy in their work day to day or they're very busy in their business day to day. And a lot of them don't always have the time to come up for air to think about, how do I make all the pieces of my life work? How do I plan for my future? They're just in it. They're in the business. They're making the money. And there's usually a lot of stuff left on the table in terms of efficiencies around tax planning and how things are structured to really support these individuals. So it requires a really kind of all hands on deck approach to help them with the complexities that is their either business or their profession and managing their finances. But like you said, there's an intergenerational situation at play here as well, where with this wealth and the complexities of this wealth, people are thinking about their children or the people who are set to inherit this money. How do we do this properly? How do we set this up most effectively? And how do I work with all the stakeholders to make sure we're having conversations about how that wealth will flow? And this is what high net worth individuals want. It's so funny. I had a great conversation with a very high net worth individual. His name is John Sleeman. I'm sure everybody's heard of him, Sleeman Beer.
Have drank some of his beer, I think,
yes. I'm sure we all have as good Canadians. But he said to me once, he goes, Marissa, I don't need all the wooing, right? Like the Leafs tickets, the fancy dinners for my advisor. I just need someone who's going to care just as much about taking care of all the pieces of my financial well-being that I don't have time to think about. Someone who's going to help me have the tough conversations, see things that are coming that I can't think about, find ways to create efficiencies, and give me peace of mind to know that when things are going great, I'm taken care of, but also to know when things, when the proverbial shit hits the fan, that I'm also taken care of. He's like, that is what I need. And I want my mind, my peace of mind to basically be freed up to know that this person is taking care of that. So and again, as you get into future generations of high net worth, they're looking for more digital interactions. They want more value-aligned investment. They're focused on impact and collaboration and education. So these are all things we're seeing bubbling up where you are becoming an advisor. You're becoming an extension of their bench strength, no longer the person who's just doling out investment advice.
That's exactly it. Also, I was thinking, and knowing high net worth individuals, there is also a lot of reliance on the spouse because they're very busy. They want somebody they can trust who will look after sort of the interactions, and to ignore that person, that spouse, is also detrimental because they're just, to your point, so busy, or the other thing is incredibly focused. In other words, they don't want to know about all this other stuff. So there's a reliance on, whether it's spouse or other family members to hopefully pick up the slack. And so it's, to understand that key dynamic within families, because I've seen it time and time again, where you have someone who's incredibly successful, and they leave it a lot to their family, and then they just beam in every once in a while and say, hey, what's going on? And then beam back out again. But day to day and all those transactional type things, they sort of delegate off to other members of their family. So it's another important point to think about when you're dealing with these high net worth families.
And I think a lot of advisors will say, well, how do I engage the less engaged stakeholders, right? How do I make sure? So, we mentioned earlier that you can ask people, who are the people that should be at this table right now? Who ideally are going to be impacted by the conversations that we're having today and in the future? And how do we best engage them? Advisors need to ask, how do we best engage these underengaged, underserved people in your life? If it's a female spouse or if it's a male spouse, what would be relevant to get them to come to these meetings? What type of information would they want to talk about? How can we package the information in a way that matters? It's funny, I had an advisor come to me a few years ago, and we had this conversation as a lot of companies were switching to digital statements, getting away from paper statements.
Right.
And he said, I realized that the physical paper for a lot of my clients, especially older clients, was a very important piece of our trust building as part of their understanding. And he said for a lot of older female clients, a lot of the spouses, which he had the primary relationship with the male, with the husband, and again, I'm generalizing, but this was their feedback,
That's it.
said, a lot of times the women would get the statements and look at them, and they'd be in the meeting and they would need a little more time to look at it and go home and digest it and come back with questions later. Like just,
Right.
Looking at a computer screen or hearing the person speak at them, it wasn't digesting as well. They took the statement, they look at it, or they took the projections or the plans of what they were potentially going to do, and they needed to digest it. And again, I don't think this is just women. I think there are a lot of people out there who need to kind of go away and come back. And so they've worked this into their practice now, where they always do kind of a few day or a week after follow-up to see if they had any questions, or to plant questions to say, hey, these might have been some questions that likely came up. Let me put them in writing for you, because sometimes people need to see it. And we're learning that more and more in this day and age. People learn differently. So if you're an advisor that only speaks at people, you may have to come at that a little differently to create space for people to meet you where they are at. And that could be through writing on paper. It could be follow-up questions because they don't have them in the moment, or allow them to send pre-questions so that you can answer them. And it's really, again, how do you engage these underserved markets or these underserved stakeholders? Ask them.
Right.
Just ask them.
Just ask, right? Yeah. Exactly. The other technique that seems to be working now is because of technology, because now, again, families tend to be scattered around. I know a couple of advisors who do sort of the family meeting. They use Teams or Zoom or one of those, especially as it relates to estate planning. That seems to be one of those topics where everybody's input is important, in that transparency, with a huge amount of success. In other words, the son might be in Calgary, the daughter might be in Halifax, the parents are in Burlington. Let's do a meeting and talk about what your intent and what you want to do from an estate planning point of view, and get everybody's input. For the people who have implemented that, I've heard nothing but good things.
It's a brilliant approach, because not only are you're coming in there as an advisor because you are concerned about maybe the insurance policies that you have in place with them or don't, or you're talking about their money, but these are also tough conversations that families need to have. And you are doing the family an incredible service by encouraging these conversations that could be uncomfortable. And I think a lot of people prepare for death in the way of, can we cover the funeral costs? Right. And it's like, the funeral is the least of your concern, right? In this day and age, executors should know exactly what the people's wishes are before they die, or power of attorneys should know exactly what people's wishes are and expectations are before there's an illness. And I would argue, and I know you and I are chatting about this, there's so much more to prepare for illness than there is in death. And, in terms of cash required for different treatments or different care, and families are not talking about this until these things happen. And it's like preparing for war after someone's dropped a bomb on your country. Like, that is the worst time to run around and say, okay, what do we got? What are we going to do? What's our plan? Like, these are things that families need to be talking about. And the advisor is the best, most fully equipped individual in families' lives to say, hey, let's have some conversations. Let's talk about, what is the family legacy plan here? What is your family governance strategy? What happens if and when? And that will create very long-lasting, deep-rooted relationships that should matter to advisors, not just because they want to do great work, but you want to also make sure that you're creating value, long-term value in your book. And that will matter one day.
Well, I was going to say, think of how sustainable your business is if you had those kind of relationships and those types of connections with not only the clients that you have, but future generations and everybody in that family unit. Like, I couldn't think of a more valuable business for an advisor to own than that type of business.
Yeah, I think every advisor out there struggles with this where, as people get older, you want to tell them to go live and spend your money and give it all away, but that's a direct hit on your book and your
Right.
income. And it's there, and the reality is the way advisors get paid today based on the alpha is not aligned with the value that really should be generated through the gamma, through the long relationships. And we're seeing more and more of that. In fact, gamma drives a lot of the beta and the alpha.
Right.
But it's certainly important for advisors to understand that through relationships, you will future-proof your business.
I love it. So, Marissa, what's next for you? I always ask. So, where do you go from here?
So as I mentioned off the top, I love working with advisors. I have a lot of advisors who are clients who are really looking to better serve their clients, to maybe reposition some things, deal with large successions. There's a lot of mergers and successions happening in the business out there, and that's a massive undertaking. So I work with advisors who maybe recently bought big books or who are transitioning away from them. Those are significant transitions that, yes, impact clients, but are really hard and challenging for advisors and teams. So I love doing work in that space, but I also love working with entrepreneurs, working with advisors, anyone who's looking to do better and serve better. So I continue to do my executive coaching. I also love getting on stages, and I have my podcast, and I always encourage people to reach out. I love having conversations and meeting new people. And most people who reach out to me who want to work with me, their emails start with something like, I don't know if you do this type of work, but ...
like
insert
that, yeah.
their request here. And I say, yes,
Yeah.
that's the absolute way to go, because I'm open to certainly doing all types of work to serve this industry that's been really good to me, of course. So, yeah.
I love it. Well, if you listen to my show, you know that this is my rapid fire. I got 3 questions segment of my show. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions. And it's the first thing that pops into your mind. The first question is, what is the best advice you have ever received?
Don't think, just do.
I love that one. That's the best. That sounds like a tattoo, actually.
I feel like I don't take that advice very well, but it's very good advice.
Absolutely. And by the way, I can tell you by observation, the most successful people I know are the ones who just do it, right? In other words, the ones who talk themselves out of it are the ones that 3 years later are like, oh, I just should have did it. And so I think that is the best advice. As I said, that sounds like tattoo type of thing, advice. What is the best book? I see books behind you. What is the best book you have ever read?
I think I'm just, the first one that popped into my head was Onward by Howard Schultz.
I love, oh, by the way, oh man, I love that. We have a project, by the way, called Pike's Place internally because of that book.
And I'm in full transparency, because anyone who knows me is going to be like, she doesn't read books. And the truth is, I listen to a lot of books and I listen to a lot of podcasts. It's how I prefer to absorb my information. But I actually did read that book, and it was surprising. I don't know why it was so surprising to think that a business philosophy focused around people could be so powerful, but it's amazing. It's a must read.
I love it. And yeah, and I will absolutely agree. It's in my top 5. Absolutely. And as I said, we internally in the company, we have a whole project that's based around that book called Pike's Place. So it's creating that great, the best client experience in the industry. That's our goal as an organization, but that's aside. And finally, how do you want to be remembered?
I want to be remembered as the person that tees other people up. I want to help people see the best in themselves and always have their backs, but more importantly, just tee them up to be their best selves and live their best lives.
I love it. And I think you're doing it. So that's fantastic. So, Marissa, the summary of what I've learned in our time together is, basically demographics are changing around us, right? They're changing as we speak, right? And we all have a responsibility to adapt our businesses and our approach to these new changes and these shift in demographics, these shifts in decision makers, these new people we have to care of. The traditional ways that we have done business, I don't think are going to hold as well as they did as we look future. If we don't recognize it, if we don't embrace it, and if we don't adapt to it, we are not going to be successful in the future. I think the people who don't and continue down that traditional path, and I think there's a reason why there's 1/3 less advisors in the industry than there was during the pandemic, is it's moved on, right? The business has become not more complex, but different. And I think as I was listening to you talk and thinking back on our discussion, I keep thinking about Darwin, right? It's not the fastest or strongest of a species that survives. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. And I think that's what we're seeing right in front of us. So this has been great. Marissa, if people want to learn more about you or how to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
You can go to my website, marissateeter.com. You can find me on Instagram, marissa.m.teeter. Or you can listen to my podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. It's Teeter Talks. And I know it sounds like tater tots, but those are delicious, so I'm fine with it.
That's a good way to be known. I love tater tots, by the way. Yeah. And I love your Instagram too. So everyone should follow that. You'll see me like all the time on.
I appreciate the support.
Or steal. I've stole some of your stuff if you haven't noticed. Also, I'm taking it.
You can take it. Yeah.
So Marissa Teeter of the podcast Teeter Talks, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.